The letter arrived on a Tuesday, folded inside a county envelope, so plain it looked like a bill. Mara Sutton was 55 years old, sitting at a kitchen table with $31,400 of debt that had her brother's name on it and her signature underneath. The phone had been ringing for 3 weeks. She had stopped answering it. Dale was gone. He had slipped out of the world the way he had lived in it, quietly, without warning, without explanation. He left behind a rented room, a duffel bag of clothes, and a silence where a conversation should have been. Mara had spent a decade not knowing what to say to him. Now there was nothing left to say. She thought that was the end of it. She thought wrong, because somewhere in a small Ohio town called Aldermere, on a street called Birch, behind a door nobody had opened in years, Dale Sutton had been building something, not for himself, for her. He had been building it slowly, the way a man builds something he is not sure he deserves to finish, with careful hands, in the early hours, without telling a soul. The sign above the door still had the family name on it. He had never changed it. What Mara found inside that building would not make sense at first. It rarely does when someone has loved you in a language you never learned to hear. There were tools under oilcloth. There were ledgers written in a hand she recognized from birthday cards she had kept in a shoebox. There was a letter, 12 pages, dated and signed, that had been waiting 4 years for her to be ready to read it. She was not looking for a second chance. At 55, with debt collectors and an empty account and a brother she had never fully understood, she was not looking for anything except a way through. But the door at 14 Birch Street had been left unlocked for her. All she had to do was push it open. The first letter came on a Thursday. Mara Sutton pulled it from the mailbox between a grocery circular and an electric bill, and she almost put it back. It was from a collections firm in Cincinnati, and the number printed in the window of the envelope was $31,400. She stood at the end of her driveway in her work coat and read it twice. Then she folded it and went inside. Her brother Dale had been dead for 19 days. He had gone quietly, the way he did most things, in a rented room above a hardware store in a town Mara had never visited. A neighbor had found him. The funeral was small. Mara had driven 4 hours each way and spoken to people she did not know, and on the drive home she had thought about the last time she had spoken to Dale on the phone, which was 14 months before. She could not remember who had called whom. The collections letter explained that Dale had taken out a small business loan 6 years prior, using a co-signer whose name and social security number matched Mara's exactly. She did not remember signing anything. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter flat in front of her and tried to remember. The table was the same one she had owned for 22 years, a round oak thing with a scratch along one edge from moving day, and she pressed her palm against that scratch and thought. Nothing came. She called the number on the letterhead that afternoon. The man who answered was not unkind, but he was clear. The loan had been taken out in the amount of $18,000, with interest and penalties now totaling $31,400. The co-signer was liable. That was the word he used. Liable. Mara wrote it on the back of an envelope and stared at it after she hung up. The phone rang again on Friday. A different firm, same tone. Then on Monday, a certified letter arrived from a third party, this one referencing a line of credit for $4,800 that Dale had opened at a supply house in Dayton. Mara signed for it at the door and set it on the kitchen table next to the first one. She made coffee. She did not drink it. She was 55 years old. She had worked as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized roofing company in Zanesville for 11 years, and she was good at it, and the salary was steady. She owned her house outright, had paid it off 2 years prior, a fact she had felt quietly proud of, the way you feel proud of something you accomplished without any help. That was gone now. or close to it. The equity in the house was the only thing standing between her and a number that would take years to clear. She did not cry. She wiped her face on the back of her hand and went to work on Tuesday morning, and sat at her desk and entered figures into a spreadsheet and did not tell anyone. Her boss, a man named Gerald, who wore the same brand of flannel shirt in 4 different colors, asked her if she was feeling all right. She said she was tired. He nodded and left her alone. That was the best thing anyone did for her that week. By the following Friday, she had received 5 collection notices and 2 phone calls from an attorney's office. She had also received on the previous Wednesday a thin envelope from the Aldermere County Clerk's office in Aldermere, Ohio, forwarded from Dale's last address. It was mixed in with the rest of the mail, and she had set it on the table without opening it. For 3 days it sat there while she opened the others, read them, stacked them, and tried to think clearly about numbers she had not asked to inherit. She picked up the county envelope on Saturday morning. It was lighter than it looked. Inside was a single folded document, a deed transfer notification, the kind a county clerk sends as a matter of record, stating that the property located at 14 Birch Street, Aldermere, Ohio, assessed parcel number 471-6, described as a commercial structure of approximately 2,100 square feet, had been transferred upon the death of Dale R. Sutton to Mara J. Sutton, as designated in a recorded beneficiary instrument filed 4 years prior. The assessed value of the property was listed as $4,200. Mara read it standing at the kitchen counter. She read it again sitting down. She had never heard Dale mention a property. She had never heard him mention Aldermere. In the 30 years she had known him as an adult, known being a loose word, known being the word you use when someone is family, and you have shared meals and holidays and long silence in the same room. He had never once said the words print shop or Birch Street or Aldermere, Ohio. She checked the name on the document 3 times. Dale R. Sutton. Her brother. She set the paper on the table with the collection letters. She looked at the stack for a long moment. The coffee maker clicked off in the kitchen and the house went quiet except for the sound of wind against the storm window above the sink. She pressed one hand flat on top of the stack, the deed transfer on top, and held it there as if something might shift beneath her palm. She called the Aldermere County Clerk's office on Monday morning and waited on hold for 11 minutes. The woman who answered confirmed the transfer, confirmed it was valid and recorded, and read back the parcel description without inflection. Mara asked how long the property had been in Dale's name. 19 years, the woman said. 19 years and 4 months, if she wanted to be exact. Mara said she did not need to be exact. She thanked the woman and hung up. She pulled out a road atlas, a paper one, the kind she kept in the car and had never replaced with anything else, and found Aldermere. It was in the northeastern part of the state, a town of roughly 3,000, sitting at the junction of County Road 7 and a state route that didn't appear to lead anywhere in particular. 140 miles from her kitchen table. She measured the distance with her thumb. She did not decide right away. She went back to work on Tuesday and Wednesday and entered her figures and answered her phone and ate lunch at her desk, a habit she had never broken. On Wednesday evening, she sat in the chair by the front window and watched the light go flat over the neighbor's roof. A property, a print shop. Her name on a deed for a building she had never seen, in a town she had never visited, left to her by a brother who had owed her nothing and apparently given her something anyway. She did not know what to do with that. She packed a bag on Thursday night. Nothing elaborate. 2 changes of clothes, her work boots, a flashlight, the road atlas, and the county envelope with the deed transfer inside. She set the bag by the door and went to bed. In the morning, she told Gerald she needed 3 days. He looked at her over his coffee cup and said to take 4 if she needed them. She said 3 would be enough. She did not know yet whether that was true. Mara had known Dale for 53 years, which is to say she had known him her whole life and understood him for almost none of it. He was 2 years older. In childhood photographs, he stood slightly apart from everyone else, not unhappy, just separate, the way a fence post stands apart from the grass around it. Their mother used to say Dale was self-contained. Their father said less charitable things. Mara had settled somewhere in the middle, which is where she had lived with him ever since. He had worked with his hands most of his life. Not skilled trades, not at first. He had moved between jobs the way some people move between towns, without urgency, without a plan that anyone else could see. He had worked a season at a grain elevator outside Coshocton. He had laid asphalt for 2 summers in the late 1980s. He had driven a delivery truck for a paper supply company for 6 years, which was the longest Mara could remember him holding any single position. She had thought, at the time, that the paper company might stick. It did not. What she had not known, or had not thought to ask, was what he did with the years that followed. She had her own life by then, her job, her house, the ordinary machinery of days that fills up the space where attention might otherwise go. They spoke on the phone 3 or 4 times a year. Christmas, usually. The occasional birthday. Conversations that ran to 20 minutes and covered weather and health and nothing of consequence. The way conversations do when 2 people have agreed without saying so to keep certain doors closed. She had not pushed. He had not offered. That was the arrangement. She thought about this on the drive out, somewhere between Zanesville and the county line, with the Atlas open on the passenger seat and the heater running low against the October air. She thought about the last time she had seen him in person, which was 4 years prior at their mother's burial in Coshocton. Dale had stood at the graveside in a dark coat that fit him badly across the shoulders, and afterward he had eaten a plate of ham and scalloped potatoes at the church hall and spoken quietly to people Mara did not recognize. She had watched him from across the room. He had looked, she thought now, like a man with somewhere to be. She had assumed it was nowhere in particular. She had been wrong about that. The paper supply job was where it had started, she pieced together later. 6 years in a delivery truck running commercial accounts across northeastern Ohio, and somewhere in that time Dale had learned to read what his customers needed. He had watched print shops open and close. He had seen what equipment sat idle, what towns were losing their only source of small commercial printing. What happened to a church when the place that printed its bulletins shut down without notice? He had been paying attention to something. He simply had not said what it was. Mara knew almost none of this when she turned off the state route onto County Road 7. She knew only what the county clerk had told her and what the deed transfer described. A commercial structure, 2,100 square feet, assessed at $4,200 in Dale's name for 19 years. The math put him there in his mid-30s. She tried to picture him at 35, walking into a building in a town she had never heard of, and could not quite do it. It did not fit the version of Dale she had carried around for decades. That was beginning to trouble her. Aldermere announced itself with a water tower and a feed store, and a long main street that had the particular look of a town that had absorbed a series of small losses over many years and adjusted to each one without drama. A hardware store. A diner with a hand-lettered specials board in the window. A post office in a building that had been something else before. The grain elevator at the north end was still running. She could see the dust in the air above it. The rest was quiet in the way that small towns are quiet on a Friday morning in October, which is to say it was not empty, just unhurried. She drove down Birch Street twice before she stopped. The building was mid-block, set between a vacant lot and a former insurance office that now appeared to be a quilting supply shop. It was a single-story brick structure, painted once in a cream color that had gone gray in patches, with a wide front window boarded from the inside with plywood. Above the window, in gold leaf letters that had faded but not flaked, it read, Sutton Fine Printing. Established 1994. She sat in the car and looked at it. Sutton. Her name. Their name. Dale had not called it Dale's Print Shop or anything with his own first name on it. He had used the family name, the one they had both grown up carrying, the one that appeared on the deed transfer in the county clerk's envelope on the passenger seat. She did not know what to make of that. She pressed her fingers against the steering wheel and looked at the gold lettering, and thought about a man who had built something and put the family name above the door, and then never mentioned it to the only family he had left. She got out of the car. The air smelled of dry leaves and something faintly metallic from the direction of the elevator. Birch Street was quiet. A pickup truck moved through the intersection at the far end and did not slow down. Mara stood on the sidewalk in front of the boarded window and looked up at the lettering, and then at the door, which was a steel-framed commercial door with a lever handle and a deadbolt that had no key in it. She had not thought to ask the county clerk about keys. She went back to the car and got the pry bar she had packed in the rear compartment, the one she kept for emergencies, a 30-inch Estwing with a straight shank and a nail slot she had never used. She had packed it the same way she had packed the flashlight, without a clear reason, on instinct. The side door was around the back, off a narrow alley that ran between the building and the vacant lot. It was a hollow-core wood door, older than the front, and the frame had shifted enough over the years that the bottom corner dragged against the threshold. Mara worked the pry bar into the gap above the latch plate and leaned into it. The frame groaned. She adjusted her grip, set her shoulder, and pushed. The door gave with a sound like a hard exhale, and the smell that came out was ink and machine oil and dust and something older underneath all of it. Something that reminded her of the inside of her father's workshop when she was small. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. Dale had been in here. She was certain of that now, in the way you are certain of a thing before you have any evidence for it. He had been in here, and he had worked in here, and he had left his name above the door, and he had said nothing. She stepped inside. She left before 6 in the morning, while the street outside was still dark, and the neighbors' houses showed no lights. She had made a thermos of coffee and set it on the passenger seat next to the atlas and the county envelope. The car was a 2009 Subaru wagon with 114,000 miles on it, and a rear window that fogged faster than the defroster could clear it. She had owned it for 7 years and trusted it the way you trust something that has never given you a reason not to. The first hour was interstate, 4 lanes of early morning truck traffic moving north in the gray light. She stayed in the right lane and drank the coffee and did not turn on the radio. There was nothing she wanted to hear. She thought instead about the stack of collection notices on her kitchen table, which she had not moved before leaving, and about the number 31,400, which had taken up a permanent position somewhere behind her eyes over the past 3 weeks. She thought about it the way you think about a stone in your shoe, constantly, involuntarily, with a low-grade awareness that does not go away until something changes. She had told no one where she was going. Gerald knew she needed 3 days and had asked no further questions. She had no close neighbors, no standing obligations for the weekend. Her life had the particular tidiness of someone who had spent years arranging things so that her absence would not inconvenience anyone. She had not thought of it that way before. She thought of it now, somewhere north of Columbus, watching the flat farmland open up on either side of the highway, and she pressed the thought back down and concentrated on the road. She turned off the interstate at the state route junction just past 9 in the morning. The character of the road changed immediately. 2 lanes instead of 4, the surface older, the center line worn to a suggestion. The land was rolling here, not flat. Low hills covered in harvested corn stubble, and woodlots of oak and beech that had dropped most of their leaves. Farm lanes appeared and disappeared. A rusted implement shed stood at the edge of a field with its doors open to the sky. She passed a grain elevator she was not looking for, and then the one she was. And then she turned onto County Road 7. The road went to gravel after a mile and a half. She had known it from the atlas, but the sound of it still caught her. The tick and scatter of stones against the wheel wells, the slight looseness in the steering that gravel always produced. The world closed in a little. Trees pressed closer on either side. A creek ran parallel to the road for a quarter-mile, shallow and clear over a bed of flat shale, and she slowed to watch it without quite deciding to. There was a great blue heron standing motionless in the shallows 20 yards off the road, and it did not move as she passed. She watched it in the rearview mirror until the road curved and it was gone. Aldermere was 9 miles down County Road 7. She came into it from the south, past a township cemetery and a volunteer fire station with 2 bay doors and an American flag that moved slightly in the October air. The town was small enough that she was through the residential streets and onto the main commercial block within 2 minutes of the town line. She registered the water tower, the feed store, the diner, the post office, a barber shop with a mechanical pole that was still turning, a farm supply store with a flatbed trailer parked diagonally in front, loaded with fence posts, things that had been in place for a long time and were not planning to move. She found Birch Street on the second pass. It ran 1 block off the main street, parallel to the alley behind the commercial row, and it was quieter than the main block by several degrees. An old surveyor's office with curtains drawn. A building that had been a small appliance repair shop and was now nothing in particular, its window empty. The quilting supply store with a hand-painted sign and 2 cars in front. And then the building. She drove past it slowly, looking through the driver's window, and then continued to the end of the block and sat at the stop sign for a moment before turning around. The second pass was slower. She pulled to the curb and left the engine running. The gold leaf lettering above the boarded window caught the morning light at a low angle, and she could read every word clearly. Sutton Fine Printing. Established. 1994. The letters were a traditional serif face, the kind that used to appear above every small-town business in the country, the kind that took skill to lay and time to do correctly. Whoever had applied them had known what they were doing. She turned off the engine. She sat for a few minutes without moving. A woman walked past on the opposite sidewalk with a small dog on a leash and glanced at the Subaru without particular interest. A truck rumbled down the main street 1 block over, invisible but audible, its diesel note bouncing off the brick faces of the buildings. The October air was cool and still. Mara looked at the building and thought about 19 years. 19 years was a long time to keep a secret, which was one way to think about it. 19 years was also a long time to keep something safe for someone, which was another way entirely. She got out and stood on the sidewalk. Up close, the building was in better condition than she had expected from the boarded window. The brick was sound, no visible spalling. The mortar lines were tight. The roof line was level, no visible sag. Someone had painted the front door, the steel commercial one, within the last several years. She could tell by the way the paint still held its sheen in the sheltered corner where the door frame met the brick. Small maintenance, invisible from a distance. The kind of thing a person does when they intend to come back. She went around to the side, through the vacant lot where the grass had gone to seed, and the ground was hard with early frost. The alley behind was packed dirt and gravel, wide enough for a delivery truck. She found the rear door, hollow core wood, the frame settled and dragging, and she went back to the car for the pry bar. She worked slowly. The Estwing was a good tool, balanced and solid, and she had used a pry bar before on enough occasions that the technique came back without effort. She set the blade above the latch plate, leaned her weight into the straight shank, and felt the frame give in stages, first a creak, then a groan, then a low pop as the jamb pulled free. The door swung inward. Cool air moved past her, outward, as if the building had been holding its breath for years and had finally been permitted to let it go. She stood in the opening and looked into the dark and smelled ink and machine oil and the ghost of something older underneath. And she understood, standing there with the October light at her back and the pry bar in her hand, that she had not driven 140 miles to look at a building that was worth $4,200. She had driven 140 miles because Dale had put the family name above the door and said nothing, and she needed to know why. The inside of the building was one long room with a pressed tin ceiling and a concrete floor that had been painted gray at some point and worn back to raw concrete in the traffic lanes. The light came from nowhere. The front window was boarded. The rear window above the alley door was filmed with years of dust. And Mara stood just inside the threshold and let her eyes work through the dark before she moved. She clicked on the flashlight and swept it slowly from left to right. The beam caught shapes. A long wooden workbench along the south wall, metal shelving units, a paper cutter on a wheeled stand, silhouettes under canvas drop cloths that she could not yet identify. She did not rush. She moved the light carefully, the way you move through a room that belongs to someone else. The smell was the first thing she tried to name. Ink was part of it, a deep petroleum and mineral smell that had soaked into the concrete and the plaster walls over years of use and would never fully leave. Machine oil was underneath that, the specific heaviness of a well-maintained press. And beneath both of those was something drier and older. Paper. Not rotting paper, not the sweet decay of moisture damage, but the clean, faintly vanilla smell of good paper stock stored properly in a dry space. She recognized it without being able to say where from, the way you recognize a piece of music you learned as a child. It settled something in her. She took a step forward and then another. She worked her way down the south wall first, running the flashlight along the workbench. The surface was clear except for a wooden type tray pushed to the far end. A California job case, she would learn the name later, with its small divided compartments still holding lead type in several sizes. The metal shelving beside the bench held reams of paper in sealed plastic wrap, 2 cases of ink cans with the lids tight, and a row of glass jars holding small hardware. Brads, coins, furniture pieces, spacing material she did not yet have names for. Everything was dusty. Everything had been unused for some time. But nothing was disordered. The shelves were organized. The paper was stacked square. Whatever had stopped happening here had stopped deliberately, not in a hurry. The drop cloths were in the center of the room, 4 of them, covering large shapes arranged in a loose row. She lifted the nearest one by its corner and pulled it back. Underneath was a paper cutter, a Challenge brand floor model, the kind with a heavy cast iron base and a foot-operated clamp, the blade guard still in place. The blade itself was clean. No rust on the cutting edge, no surface corrosion on the guide rail. She ran 2 fingers along the rail and they came away with a faint smear of oil, but no grit. She dropped the cloth back over it and moved to the next. The second cloth covered a Vandercook proof press, a model number 4, its cylinder and carriage in the home position, its ink disc clean. The third covered what she thought at first was a large cabinet, but resolved in the flashlight beam into a paper folding machine, a Baumfolder tabletop unit on a steel stand, its rollers wrapped in cloth. She lifted each cloth and set it back and moved to the next, with the methodical attention of someone taking inventory of something she did not yet understand the value of. She was not excited. She was not overwhelmed. She was gathering information the only way she knew how, which was one item at a time. The 4th cloth was different. It was not a canvas drop cloth like the others. It was oilcloth. the heavy waxed kind, dark green, the kind used to cover food preparation surfaces in commercial kitchens. It was larger than it needed to be for whatever it covered, and it had been folded under at the edges and tucked, the way you tuck a sheet, with some care. Mara stood in front of it for a moment before she touched it. Then she took the near edge between both hands and lifted it back in a single motion. Under the oilcloth was a Heidelberg Platen press. A windmill, the printers called it, for the way its circular gripper arms rotated during the print cycle. This one was painted in the original red and black, the Heidelberg colors, and the paint was intact. No chips on the feed table, no wear marks on the impression lever. The chrome on the delivery mechanism still held its finish. She moved the flashlight slowly across it from base to flywheel, and what she saw was not a machine in storage, it was a machine in service. The ink disc had been cleaned to bare metal, the rollers had been dressed and wrapped in wax paper, the oil cups on the drive shaft were full. Someone had been here recently enough that the oil had not skinned over in the cups. She touched the nearest one with her fingertip and brought it to her nose. Fresh. 2 weeks, maybe 3. No more. She stood very still, the flashlight held on the Heidelberg. She thought about the deed transfer and the assessed value of $4,200 and the collections notices on her kitchen table. And she thought about the oil in the cups and the clean ink disc and the waxed paper on the rollers, and she understood that there was a version of this building and a version of Dale Sutton that she had not known existed and was only now beginning to see the outline of. The sound came from the doorway behind her. She turned with the flashlight and a man stepped back from the threshold, one hand raised, squinting against the beam. He was in his 70s, compact and broad through the chest, in a canvas work jacket and a feed store cap. He was holding a flashlight of his own, a heavy 4-cell unit switched off, and he lowered his raised hand slowly when she lowered her beam. He said his name was Chet Poole. He said he ran the hardware store on the main block and had seen the Subaru parked out front. He said he was not trying to startle her. His voice was unhurried and flat, the particular flatness of a man who had lived in one place long enough that he no longer felt the need to perform ease. He simply had it. He looked past her at the Heidelberg, just briefly, and then back at her. She told him her name. He nodded as if he had been expecting it, or something close to it. He held out the 4-cell flashlight toward her, handle first, without explanation. She took it. It was heavier than hers and threw a wider beam, and when she clicked it on, the whole room came up at once, ceiling to floor, wall to wall. And she saw for the first time the full scope of what Dale had assembled and maintained in this building over 19 years. Chet Poole watched her take it in. He did not say anything. He seemed to understand that what she needed in that moment was not information. What she needed was light. Chet Poole left after 20 minutes. He did not offer explanations and she did not ask for them, and when he went simply. A nod, a turn, the sound of his boots on the alley gravel fading toward the main block. She stood alone in the wide beam of his flashlight, which she had set upright on the workbench so it threw its light at the tin ceiling and diffused down through the room in a pale wash. It was not bright. It was enough. She rolled up her sleeves and started from the south wall and worked her way forward. The workbench ran 14 feet along the wall and was built from 2-inch maple, thick, heavy, the kind of bench that does not move when you lean on it. She cleared the surface first, setting the California job case on the floor with care, moving the type trays one at a time. Beneath the dust, the maple was intact, its surface marked with the small scars of decades of work. Ink stains in the grain, the impression of a steel rule dragged repeatedly across one corner, a ring from a solvent can that had sat in the same spot long enough to leave its outline. She ran her palm along it. The wood was solid. The cabinet beneath the bench ran its full length, 6 doors, each with a simple barrel latch, the kind turned with a quarter rotation of the thumb. She opened them left to right. The first held paper stock, card weight, cover weight, text weight, each variety banded and labeled in Dale's handwriting on masking tape. Small, careful letters, printed rather than cursive. The second held cans of base and varnish, a jar of reducing compound, 2 sealed containers of press wash. The third held a set of roller storage tubes, each labeled with the press type it belonged to. She opened each door and looked and closed it without disturbing what was inside. She was looking for something specific without knowing what it was, only that it was there. The fourth door was different. It did not open on the first try. She rotated the barrel latch and pulled and it held, and she tried again with more pressure and it held again. Not locked. The latch had turned, but held. The way a door holds when something behind it is pressing forward against the weight of the door. She crouched in front of it and pulled steadily, both hands on the edge of the door, and it gave all at once with a scrape of wood on concrete. Behind it, taking up the full depth of the cabinet, was a gray steel lockbox, a SentrySafe model, the kind with a combination dial on the front and a carrying handle on the top, approximately 16 inches wide and 12 inches deep. Heavy enough that Dale had needed to slide it into the cabinet rather than lift it to the shelf. She could tell by the way the concrete floor was scored in a faint arc in front of the cabinet opening, the long, slow scratch of something dragged in and pushed back over years of access. She did not try the combination. She did not know it. She sat back on her heels and looked at the box and then at the cabinet and then at the room around her. And she thought about what Chet Poole had said before he left, which was almost nothing, and what he had not said, which felt like considerably more. She went to the car and retrieved the pry bar. She felt no hesitation about it. The box was hers, the building was hers, and Dale was gone. And whatever was inside had been put there for a reason she intended to understand. The SentrySafe was built to resist fire. Not a 30-inch S-wing worked into the gap between the lid and the body at the hinge side. It took her 11 minutes. She was not in a hurry. She set the blade, applied steady pressure, moved the bar a half-inch, and applied pressure again, working the gap open in increments until the hinge pins sheared and the lid lifted. She set the pry bar on the floor and opened the box the rest of the way with her hands. Inside, on top, was a bank-banded stack of $20 bills. She lifted it out and set it on the workbench and lifted out the next and the next. 6 bands in total, each holding 50 bills at $20 each. $1,000 per band. $6,000 in the stack. She set them in a row on the maple surface and looked at them for a moment without touching them further. 6,200. She counted when she found the loose bills tucked beneath the last band. 9 20s and 4 1s. $6,200 in a fireproof box under a workbench in a print shop in Aldermere, Ohio. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stood very still. Beneath the money was a ledger. Black cloth cover, the kind sold in office supply stores. The spine reinforced with black tape that had dried and was beginning to peel at the top corner. She lifted it out and set it on the workbench beside the bills. The first page was dated January 3, 1995, 4 months after the establishment date on the sign above the door. And it began with an account entry in Dale's small printed hand. A column for the client, a column for the job, a column for the paper stock used, a column for the time in hours, a column for the amount charged. The amounts in that last column, page after page, were not what she expected. A church bulletin, 200 copies, charged at $9. A school lunch program, one-sided, 400 copies, charged at $14. A funeral program, 2 pages, charged at nothing. The word written out in full in the column. Nothing. She turned pages slowly. 19 years of jobs, running forward from January 1995 to a final entry dated March 19th of 4 years prior. The handwriting did not change much. The prices did not change much either. She found a few entries where the charge approached what the job might actually have cost in materials alone, and many more where it did not come close. The nothing entries appeared throughout, not often, but consistently, scattered through the ledger the way a person scatters something they consider ordinary. She counted 14 of them before she stopped counting. Beneath the ledger was an envelope, letter-sized, white, sealed with a strip of packing tape across the flap. Written on the front in the same small printed hand, "Read this first." She picked it up. It was not thin. There were several pages inside, she could feel them, and the paper had the slight give of something that had been handled and set down and handled again before being sealed. She turned it over in her hands. The tape was still intact. Whatever was inside had been sealed and left, and not reopened. She set the envelope on top of the ledger. She stood at the workbench in the diffused light with the 6 bands of 20s and the 9 loose bills, and the cloth-covered ledger and the sealed envelope. And she looked at all of it for a long time. Outside, a car moved down Birch Street and its sound faded, and the building went quiet again. She picked up the envelope. She set it back down. She folded it carefully and put it in the inner pocket of her coat, against her ribs, and pressed her hand flat against her chest for a moment over the place where it rested. Then she picked up the ledger and began again at the first page. She spent the night in Aldermere. There was one motel, a 6-unit cinder block affair on the south end of the main block called the Birchwood Rest, and the woman at the front desk gave her a room key attached to a plastic fob the size of a playing card, without asking for a credit card hold. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet, and was warm enough and quiet enough, and Mara lay on top of the bedspread in her clothes with the ledger on the pillow beside her and the sealed envelope still in her coat pocket, and slept without meaning to until 5:30 in the morning. She was back at the building by 6:45 with a paper cup of coffee from the diner on the main block, where a woman named Ruth had poured it without being asked when Mara sat down at the counter. She had not ordered anything else, and Ruth had not pushed. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter and exactly what was needed. Mara drank half of it standing in front of the Heidelberg, in the gray early light coming through the gaps in the front window boards, looking at the oiled cups on the drive shaft, thinking about the gap between the Dale she had known and the Dale who had serviced this machine within the last 3 weeks of his life. Chet Poole arrived at 8:15. She heard the alley door. She had propped it open with a brick she found outside, and then his boots on the concrete, unhurried as before. He had brought 2 things, a kerosene lantern, already lit, which he set on the end of the workbench and adjusted to a full flame, and a paper sack from the diner that turned out to hold a biscuit and 2 strips of bacon wrapped in wax paper. He set the sack beside the lantern without comment. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Ruth thought you looked like you forgot to eat." Mara unwrapped the biscuit and ate it, standing up. They stood together in the lantern light for a moment, not speaking. The room was better in that light than it had been in the beam of the flashlight. Warmer, with the machines casting long shadows toward the rear wall and the tin ceiling catching the glow in its pressed pattern of repeating squares. Chet looked at the open lockbox cabinet and the cleared workbench surface with the ledger on it, and he looked at Mara, and he said, "He ran it alone the whole time, you know." She said she was beginning to understand that. Chet nodded, said it the way people say things they have been holding for a while and are relieved to finally put down somewhere. She asked him what Dale printed. Chet was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not hesitation but selection. A man choosing which fact to hand over first from a large supply of them. He said Dale printed what people needed and charged what they could manage. He said the Baptist Church on Route 12 had used him for their weekly bulletin since 2001 and had never once been turned away for being short. He said the elementary school principal, a woman named Doris Chappelle, had come to Dale every September for the lunch program calendars and the spring concert programs and the graduation certificates. And Dale had charged her $8 a job for 12 years because that was what the school's discretionary budget could cover. Chet said this without emphasis, the way you describe weather. She asked when Dale had stopped running the shop. Chet said 4 years ago, give or take. Said Dale had come in one morning looking tired in a way that was different from ordinary tired and had spent the day putting things in order, cleaning the presses, covering the equipment, organizing the shelves, and at the end of the day had locked the front door and come around to the hardware store and handed Chet a key. Said, "Hold this for me." Chet had held it for 3 years and 8 months. He reached into the breast pocket of his canvas jacket and produced it now. A standard flat key on a ring with no fob, worn bright at the bow from handling, and set it on the workbench beside the ledger without ceremony. Mara picked it up. She asked what the key was for. Chet said, "The back room." She had not seen a back room. She had taken the single long space at face value and had not looked for a door, and there was not an obvious one. No frame visible in the rear wall, which was shelving units floor to ceiling. Chet walked to the far end of the shelving and reached behind the last unit and did something she could not quite see. And the unit swung outward on a piano hinge that ran its full height, smooth and silent, recently oiled. Behind it was a door. Standard interior door, 6-panel, painted the same cream as the building exterior. She put the key in the lock and turned it. The room behind the door was not large, perhaps 14 by 18 feet, but it was better finished than the main space. The floor was sealed concrete, smooth and level. The walls were insulated and drywalled, the joints taped and mudded cleanly. A single ceiling fixture held 2 fluorescent tubes, and when Mara found the switch and clicked it on, both tubes fired immediately. No flicker. Someone had run a dedicated circuit back here. She could see the conduit along the ceiling. Gray electrical conduit fastened with one-hole straps at 12-inch intervals. The work of someone who knew the electrical code and followed it by habit rather than compulsion. Along the left wall stood a Vandercook No. 4 proof press in better condition than the one in the main room. This one freshly inked, its rollers unwrapped, set up as if mid-job. Beside it, a full set of California job cases on a type cabinet, each drawer labeled. On the right wall, a steel paper cabinet, the kind with wide flat drawers for storing large stock. And above it, shelving holding a Hobart paper cutter, a saddle stapler on a stand, and 3 boxes of binder's board stacked square. And at the far end, bolted through the studs with 4 3-inch lag screws at each corner, a heavy-gauge steel cabinet, gray, approximately 4 feet wide and 5 feet tall, with a keyed lock and a handle. Not a sentry safe, a custom piece welded, the kind a person commissions or builds themselves when they want something that will not move and will not open without the right key. Mara stood in the center of the room and turned slowly. She looked at the proof press set up mid-job and the type cases and the bolted cabinet. She looked at the conduit on the ceiling and the sealed floor and the insulated walls. She looked at the fluorescent tubes burning clean and steady overhead. Dale had built this room inside the other room, quietly, over years, and had told no one but Chet Poole, and had given Chet the key without explanation, and Chet had held it without asking for one. She did not say anything for a long moment. Chet stood in the doorway behind her with the lantern light at his back. She turned to look at him. He met her eyes and looked away first, toward the bolted cabinet, and then back at her. He said, "I don't know what's in it." He said it plainly, and she believed him. He said, "Dale just told me to make sure the right person got the key." She asked how he knew she was the right person. He said, "You have the same way of going through a room," said it quietly, and did not explain further, and she did not ask him to. The key from the back room door did not fit the bolted cabinet. She had tried it before she thought better of trying it, The way you try a key in a lock that you already know is wrong because your hands need to do something while your mind catches up. The cabinet had its own lock, a different profile entirely, a tubular barrel lock set flush into the door face. She stood in front of it with the key ring in her hand and thought. Then she went back to her coat, still folded on the workbench in the main room, and reached into the inner pocket and took out the county envelope with the deed transfer inside. Behind the deed transfer, tucked flat against the back of the envelope, was a second key she had not noticed when she first opened it. Smaller than the other, brass with a round bow and a short tubular shaft. She had run her thumb across it when she first reached into the envelope and had registered it without registering it, and she had not gone back for it until now. The tubular key turned in the cabinet lock with almost no resistance. One full rotation clockwise and the bolt retracted and the door swung toward her on its hinges, slow and heavy, the way a well-made door moves when it has been hung with care. She held it open with one hand and looked. The interior of the cabinet was fitted with 3 shelves. On the top shelf, a row of manila envelopes, each sealed and labeled in Dale's hand, their labels facing out. Property title, paid receipts, equipment, insurance, lapsed. Bank records. She did not open these yet. On the middle shelf, a flat box, the kind used for storing documents, holding a row of savings bond certificates in paper sleeves, each one visible through the sleeve's glassine window, each one issued in Mara J. Sutton's name. She took the box out and set it on top of the paper cabinet behind her without counting the bonds. Not yet. On the bottom shelf, a single envelope, white, 9 by 12, unsealed but with the flap tucked in. On the front, in Dale's hand, Mara. She carried the envelope to the proof press and set it on the feed table and stood in front of it. The fluorescent tubes ran overhead, steady and indifferent. Chet Poole was in the main room. She could hear him moving quietly, the particular restraint of a person who understands they are on the outside of something and is content to stay there. She pulled a 3-legged shop stool from under the type cabinet and sat down. She opened the flap and took out the pages inside. 12 of them, folded once, written on both sides in Dale's small, careful print. At the top of the first page, a date, March 3rd, 4 years prior. Below it, Mara. Below that, a line of space, and then the letter began. He wrote, "I am not good at saying things out loud, as you know. You have known this your whole life, and I expect it has cost you something, the same way it has cost me. I am writing this down because writing is the one place where I can put a thought in the right order before it comes out wrong. I have been meaning to write it for a long time. I am going to try to say it properly now." He wrote about the paper delivery job. 6 years on the road, running accounts across the northeastern counties, watching the small print shops lose ground one by one. Not to anything dramatic, just to time and overhead, and the slow arithmetic of a business where the margins were never comfortable to begin with. He wrote that he had watched a shop in Kilbuck, close in the spring of '93, and another in Coshocton close that fall, and that what he had noticed was not the equipment going to auction, but the people who came to the auctions, the church secretaries and the school administrators and the small business owners who had depended on those shops for years and now had nowhere close to go. He wrote, "I kept thinking someone should do something about that. I kept waiting for someone to. After a while, I understood it was going to have to be me." He wrote about finding the building on Birch Street in the spring of '94. The owner was an elderly man named Harold Vess, who had run it as a small job shop for 30 years and was ready to stop. Dale had bought the building and the equipment for $11,000, most of which he had saved during the delivery years and had spent the first 6 months learning the presses by running them until he understood them. He wrote that the Heidelberg had taken him 4 months to get right and that he had ruined more stock than he wanted to calculate, but that eventually the machine and he had reached an understanding, which was how he thought about it. He wrote, I am not romantic about machines, but a good press tells you what it needs if you pay attention. He wrote about the first years, the church accounts, the school jobs, the local businesses that found him by word of mouth and kept coming back. He wrote that he had made the decision early not to charge what the market would bear, because what the market would bear was not what the people who needed him could pay, and the difference between those two numbers seemed to him less important than keeping the shop open and useful. He wrote, "I was not trying to be generous. I was trying to be practical. A shop that charges too much for the people around it is just a building with equipment in it." He wrote that he had kept his living expenses small. The rented room, no car after the first few years, meals at the diner on the days he worked late. And that the shop had covered itself, and a little more. And the little more he had put away over the years in the bonds in the cabinet. He wrote about Mara. He wrote carefully here. More carefully than in the earlier pages, the handwriting slightly slower. He wrote that he had been a poor brother, not cruel, not absent entirely, but closed in the way that some people are closed when they do not know how to be otherwise, and that he had understood this about himself for a long time without knowing how to change it. He wrote that the debt she would find, the loan with her name on it as co-signer, was the one thing he was ashamed of, and he explained it. He had needed the capital in the second year to repair the Heidelberg's feeder mechanism, and had used her name without asking, because he had not known how to ask. He wrote, "I told myself I would tell you when it was paid off. It took longer than I planned. By the time it was paid, the habit of not saying it had become its own wall. I am sorry for that. I am sorry I did not find a better way." He wrote that the bonds were $38,000 at maturity, which would more than cover the loan and leave enough to put the shop back in operation if she chose to. He wrote that the building was paid off, had been paid off since 2007, and that the title was in the manila envelope on the top shelf of the cabinet. He wrote that the equipment was worth considerably more than the assessed value of the property if she wanted to sell it, and that if she did not want to sell it, he hoped she might find someone in Aldermere who could use it, because the town still had no print shop, and the school principal was still running programs off a photocopier that jammed twice a week. He wrote, "I am not asking you to keep it running. I am only telling you what it is, so you can decide with the whole picture in front of you. That is what I should have done from the beginning." The last page was shorter than the others. He wrote, "I put the family name above the door because it was our name and I wanted to do something with it that I could be careful about. I hope that makes sense. I hope you are all right. I hope the drive out was not too bad." He had written her name at the bottom as a signature, and below it the date, and below that, very small, a single additional line. "The lantern is in the hardware store if you need it. Chet knows." Mara sat on the shop stool with the last page in both hands. The fluorescent tubes ran overhead. Somewhere in the main room, Chet Poole moved quietly along the workbench and was still again. She read the last page a second time, slowly, and then she folded all 12 pages together, the way they had come, and held them against her chest with both hands, and looked at the far wall and did not move for a long time. She drove back to Zanesville on Sunday evening and spent the following week doing two things simultaneously, the way a person does when circumstances do not allow for one problem at a time. During the day, she sat at her desk at the roofing company and entered her figures and answered her phone and said nothing to Gerald or to anyone else. In the evenings, she sat at the kitchen table with the manila envelopes from the cabinet spread out in front of her and went through them one by one, making her own notes in a spiral-bound notebook she bought at the drugstore for $2.19. The property title was clean. No liens, no encumbrance, recorded in Aldermere County in 2007, with Dale R. Sutton as sole owner and Mara J. Sutton named as transfer on death beneficiary. The paid receipts for the equipment were complete going back to '94. The bank record showed a savings account in Dale's name, closed 4 years prior, with the balance withdrawn in the form of a cashier's check. She did not find the cashier's check. She did not need to. She knew what it had become. The bonds were $38,400 at current maturity value. She had looked up each one on Tuesday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the bond certificates laid out in a row, entering the serial numbers one at a time into the Treasury's online redemption calculator. $38,400, give or take $11 across the lot of them, depending on the exact date of redemption. The debt against her name was $31,400. The arithmetic was not complicated. She sat with the notebook open and the numbers in front of her and let herself understand what Dale had done, which was to spend years putting into bonds what it would take to undo the one thing he had done without asking her. He had never told her. He had simply made it right, quietly, the way he did most things, and left her the mechanism to find it. She called the collections firms on Wednesday. Both of them. She was calm and specific and gave nothing away. She confirmed the balances outstanding, confirmed the account numbers, and told each of them to expect payment in full within 30 days. The first firm put her on hold for 3 minutes and came back with a voice that had changed register slightly. The second firm's representative said, "That's great news, Ms. Sutton." She said, "Yes." She hung up and wrote 30 days in the notebook and underlined it once. The man named Frank Aldis appeared at the building on Birch Street the following Tuesday morning. Mara had driven back to Aldermere on Monday, staying again at the Birchwood Rest, and had spent the day in the back room with the Vandercook proof press, working through the type cases, taking inventory of the pie type and the leading and the furniture in each drawer. She heard the alley door and came through the hinged shelving unit into the main room, and he was already inside, standing near the Heidelberg, looking at it with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was in his mid-50s, well-built, in a good wool jacket and clean boots. He had a pleasant, neutral face and the particular ease of a man who was accustomed to being in rooms he had not been invited into. He said his name and offered his hand, and she shook it. He said he was a developer based in Columbus and had been watching the Birch Street property for some time. He said the word watching without apparent self-consciousness. He said he had heard she had come into it recently and wanted to talk to her before she made any decisions. She said she was listening. He said he was prepared to offer $48,000 for the building and contents, a clean cash transaction, closable in 30 days. He said it the way you say a number you have calculated to feel generous without being generous. High enough to seem serious, low enough to leave room. She did not answer immediately. She looked at him and then at the Heidelberg, and then back at him. He said he understood it was a lot to think about. He said the county had assessed the property at $4,200, as she probably knew, and that commercial zoning in Aldermere was being reviewed by the Township Board in approximately 6 weeks, and that the outcome of that review was— He paused here, selecting his word. Uncertain. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The shape of what he was suggesting was clear enough. Take the offer now, before the zoning board met, or risk finding out afterward what the board's decision meant for the property's value. He said it without menace. He said it the way a man says something he believes is simply practical. She said she would think about it. He left a card on the workbench and said he hoped to hear from her soon. She called a title attorney in Columbus on Wednesday morning. She had found the name through the county bar referral service, a woman named Petra Voss, whose office was on the north side of Columbus, and whose assistant said she could make time for a call that afternoon. Mara laid out the situation clearly. The deed transfer, the bonds, the collections debt, the offer from Aldis, the zoning board meeting in 6 weeks. Petra Voss listened without interrupting and asked 4 questions when Mara finished, all of them specific. At the end, she said she would need to see the title and the deed transfer instrument in person. She said she could drive out to Aldermere on Friday. Mara said that would work. Petra Voss arrived at 10:15 on Friday morning in a dark blue sedan that she parked in front of the building on Birch Street. Mara watched her from inside through the gap in the boarded window. She was in her mid-30s, in a dark coat and low boots, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the gold lettering above the boarded window before she came to the door. She had the same expression Mara imagined she herself had worn standing there 6 days prior. Not exactly surprise, but the particular attention of someone recalibrating an expectation. She came in and shook Mara's hand and set her bag on the workbench and looked around the room once, slowly. Before she said anything about the legal matter, she said, "He built all this himself?" Mara said, "Over 19 years." Petra nodded and opened her bag. The title was clean. Petra confirmed by noon. The transfer instrument was valid, properly recorded, unambiguous. The zoning review, she said, was a real consideration but not the threat Aldous had implied. Commercial zoning in townships of Aldermere's size was rarely revoked outright, more typically reclassified in ways that affected new construction rather than existing structures. She said the $48,000 offer was, in her opinion, a number chosen to feel like a favor. She said it without heat. She said it the way she would say any fact. What happened in the following 2 days happened in the way that things happen in small towns, when a question has been waiting for an answer for a long time. Chet Poole mentioned to Ruth at the diner that Dale Sutton's sister was looking into keeping the shop. Ruth mentioned it to Doris Chappell, the school principal, who drove to Birch Street on Saturday morning and knocked on the alley door and stood in the main room and said, without preamble, that Dale had printed the elementary school's materials for 11 years and that she had already budgeted this year's print costs at Dale's rates, which she hoped was not presumptuous. A deacon from the Baptist church on Route 12 came by Saturday afternoon. A woman named Gloria Marsh, who had run the county 4-H program for 22 years, came by Saturday evening with a pan of something covered in foil and set it on the workbench and said Dale had printed her program booklet since 2003, and she just wanted Mara to know that. 3 others came without announcement on Sunday, each of them brief, each of them saying some version of the same thing, which was that the shop had mattered to them and they were glad someone was there. Mara called Petra Voss on Sunday evening. She said she would not be selling to Frank Aldous. Petra said she would send a letter to that effect on Monday morning, formal and unambiguous, with a note requesting that any further contact come through her office. Mara said that was exactly right. She stood in the alley doorway after she hung up, in the last of the afternoon light, looking down the narrow space between the building and the vacant lot. The October air had gone colder. The sky above the roofline was the flat silver gray of a season changing its mind for good. She went back inside and turned off the fluorescent tubes and covered the Vandercook with its cloth and locked the back room door behind her. Frank Aldous did not call again. She gave Gerald her notice on a Monday in November, 2 weeks after she had redeemed the bonds at the Treasury office in Columbus, and paid the collections firms in full by certified check. $31,400, 2 separate envelopes mailed on the same morning. The remaining $6,000 and change went into her own account, where it sat alongside what she had saved over the years in the quiet, incremental way of someone who spent carefully and planned for nothing dramatic. Gerald listened to her notice without interrupting, and then sat back in his chair and looked at her for a moment. He asked if she was sure. She said she was. He said the offer stood if she changed her mind. She thanked him and meant it and did not change her mind. She moved to Aldermere the first week of December. She rented the apartment above the surveyor's office on Birch Street, 2 rooms and a kitchen, $410 a month. The landlord, a retired farmer named Burl Eckstein, who accepted the first and last month in cash and gave her an extra key without being asked. The apartment's back window looked down the length of the alley to the rear door of the shop, which she found useful. She could see the light in the alley from her kitchen in the mornings and know at a glance whether anyone had been by. It was a small thing. It steadied her. She spent December in the shop. Not printing. Not yet. But learning. She worked through Dale's ledger account by account, cross-referencing the equipment receipts and the type inventory she had made in October. She learned the names of the typefaces by handling the cases, running her fingers across the matrices, setting lines of text in a composing stick, and then redistributing them. She ran the Heidelberg empty for 3 hours one afternoon. No stock, no ink, just the machine in motion, the flywheel turning, the grippers cycling, the platen opening and closing with its characteristic heartbeat rhythm, until the sound of it became familiar and the timing of it settled into her hands. She made mistakes. She cataloged them in the notebook and did not repeat them. Chet Poole came by on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of December and watched her set a line of 12-point Garamond in the composing stick for 20 minutes without saying anything. Then he said she was holding the stick at the wrong angle. She adjusted it. He said that was better and went back to the hardware store. She saw him most days after that, briefly, without agenda. He did not offer instruction unless she asked for it, and she asked for it carefully, only when she had first tried the thing herself and understood specifically what she did not know. He seemed to find this acceptable. He never refused a question. She printed the first job on January 9th. A funeral program for a woman named Edna Pruitt, 83 years old, longtime member of the Baptist Church on Route 12. The church secretary had called Mara on a Monday and explained the situation with the particular apologetic delicacy of someone asking for something they are not certain they are entitled to ask for. Mara said she could have it by Wednesday. She set the type by hand. Garamond, 12-point for the body, 18-point for the name. A line of ornamental border from the type cabinet's bottom drawer that she had not known was there until she went looking. She ran 200 copies on the Heidelberg, on a cream cardstock from the sealed reams on the south wall shelves, and trimmed them on the Challenge floor cutter, and folded them on the Baum folder, and stacked them square. She did not charge anything. She wrote the word nothing in the ledger's last column, in the same column where Dale had written it 14 times before her, in the same small, careful print. The school principal, Doris Chappell, came in on a Friday morning in late January with a manila folder of materials for the spring semester lunch calendar. She sat on the shop stool and went through the specs with Mara, item by item, page count, stock weight, fold type, quantity, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time and knew exactly what she needed. At the end, she slid the folder across the workbench and said, "Dale always charged $8. Mara said, "I know." She wrote the job in the ledger. $8 in the column. She did not change the rate. There was no reason to. If you have found this story meaningful, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one waiting, and they are made for exactly the kind of quiet you are sitting in right now. By the end of February, she had run 11 jobs, 2 more funeral programs, both at nothing. The school calendar, 3 versions of a church bulletin run monthly, a business card order for a cabinet maker on Route 7 who paid $43 and said it was the first time in 4 years he had been able to get cards printed without driving to the city. She entered each job in the ledger in the column after Dale's last entry, picking up the page where he had left off. The handwriting different, but the format the same. She did not think of it as continuing Dale's work. She thought of it as doing her own, in a place that had been made ready for her by someone who had understood, 4 years before she did, what she would need. Chet's granddaughter appeared on a Thursday afternoon in March. Her name was June and she was 19, and she stood in the alley doorway in a canvas jacket 2 sizes too large for her, and said her grandfather had mentioned the shop. She did not say what she wanted specifically. She looked at the Heidelberg, the way Mara had looked at it that first morning, with the particular attention of someone who does not know yet what a thing is, but understands that it matters. Mara did not ask her any questions. She pulled the stool out from under the type cabinet and set it beside the press and picked up the composing stick and showed June how to seat the type against the knee, how to read the nick to keep the letters facing the right direction, how to feel when the line was tight without testing it so firmly that the type sprang loose. She did not offer ceremony. She did not make a speech about learning or craft or what the shop had meant. She simply showed her the next thing, the same way you show anyone the next thing when they are standing in front of you ready to learn it. On an evening in late March, with the last of the day's light going flat and amber through the gaps in the front window boards, Mara stood at the composing stone and set a line of type she had been thinking about for some weeks. 18-point Garamond, upper and lower case. She set it, locked the form, and ran a single proof on the Vandercook, just one sheet pulled by hand, the cylinder rolling slow and even across the type. She held the proof up to the window light. The impression was clean. The ink coverage was even. She set the proof on the composing stone and looked at it for a moment, and then left it there. The alley door was propped open against the mild evening air. She heard him before she saw him. The sound of footsteps on the gravel that stopped at the threshold. The particular hesitation of someone who is uncertain whether they are permitted to come further. She turned. A man stood in the doorway, somewhere in his 40s, in a coat that had been good once, with a duffel bag over one shoulder, and the look of someone who had been traveling longer than he had planned. He looked at the gold lettering above the front window, which was visible from the alley if you stood at the right angle. He looked at Mara. He said he was not sure if the place was open. She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached to the workbench and picked up the Estwing pry bar and held it out to him, handle first. He looked at it and then at her. She said, "The side door sticks." He took the bar. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He went around to the side. The light went gold and then gray over the composing stone. Outside in the alley, the gravel was quiet. Some things arrive the way they are meant to arrive, without announcement, without explanation, in the plain language of a tool passed between two people who understand, without being told, exactly what it is for.